If you're a JavaScript developer, you probably heard of and use the spread operator, but there's one thing about how it works that you probably don't know. Let me tell you what it is. What's up, everyone? My name is James Hewick, and I do weekly videos on web development, and I spend a lot of time talking about JavaScript. And today I want to talk about a specific feature in JavaScript, which is the spread operator or the spread syntax. Now, typically you've used this or seen other people use it to make copies of arrays or to make copies of properties inside of an object. But there's one really specific thing about how this works that might surprise you that I'm wondering if you know, because I never see this addressed in any tutorial. So I wanted to make sure you know how this works fully and what pitfalls you can look out for. So I'm starting out on the documentation on Mozilla for the spread syntax, Mozilla being kind of the go-to documentation for anything JavaScript. So if you look in here, they'll give you some of the basic examples of making copies of arrays and objects, and all that stuff is really great. But then if you scroll down enough, and you have to scroll down pretty far, you get to this really big call out that says spread syntax, spread operator, effectively goes one level deep while copying an array or properties of an object, that sort of stuff. Therefore, it may be unsuitable for copying multi-dimensional arrays, as the following example shows, which I'll show you an example now. So the most important takeaway here, and you'll see what this looks like in a second, is that the spread operator can only copy things that are one level deep. It can't make copies of things that are multiple levels deep. And again, we'll show you exactly what that means. So let's go ahead and look at a couple pieces of code here. So I'm going to start with, I can keep that up. So let me start with, I'll copy this stuff and just make an array. So if I had an array of names, and so I wanted James, which is myself, my wife, Lily, one of our dogs, and then Sevi, one of our dogs. If I wanted to make a copy of that, I could say, I want to create copy names equals, and then I could do the array syntax, and then I could spread out with these three dots names. So what this is saying is take every item inside of this array and basically spread it out, copy it over into this new array. And you can see it kind of shows us what this array looks like, which is over here, and it matches exactly what's in this first one. Now, a question that you're probably going to have is, what extension am I using to get this real-time feedback? This is the Quokka extension. I've got a video on Quokka that you can look at in VS Code, so you can set this up as well. So it'll show me my logs and just information over here, as well as in this output terminal at the bottom. And if I do a console log of names and then a console log of copy names, you'll see they look basically the same. Now, the interesting thing about this is this actually makes a true copy, which means if I change names of 0, so the first item in the names array, if I change it to Billy, and then I do that before I log these out, you'll see that only changed the name that's in this first array. So it only changed the first index inside of this array, not this array. You can see it down here. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's how you make copies of arrays. You'll have something very similar for objects. And if you ever see me write code, you'll see me use some of these longer names that kind of define what is in this data. So this is an object in JavaScript. Also, there are formal maps in JavaScript, but I just refer to these as maps. And it's these key value pairs where the key is going to be the ID of the user or of the student name. And then the value is going to be the name. And you can see that really displayed here. Student ID 2. So student ID is the key, and then 2, and the value is names, and then I call it a map. So that's the variable name. Anyway, if I wanted to make a copy of that thing, I can say ID names copy. I can shorten it a little bit. And I can do my brackets for an object and then spread out the student ID to names map. Okay. And if we look at another console log, this should be exactly like you would expect from what we just did with arrays. So if we console log the ID names copy, again, those should look exactly the same. And if I were to update one of these like student, if I update that to Billy, now you see it changes just for the original object, but not the second one. So this is probably everything you've been expecting. But now here comes the tricky part. What if inside of this object, what if we want to make a copy of this object, but each item or each value inside of this object associated with this key on the right is an object itself? And the implication of this is really big in terms of how JavaScript works. It's this idea of pass by reference versus pass by value. So if you have an object and you try to make a copy of it, basically what you're doing is you're having two separate variables point to the same object in memory, versus if it's a primitive like an integer or string, something like that, it's making a true copy of it. So if we try to make a copy of this student ID to profiles map, it's not going to make a true copy. So let's see. We've got an example down here. I'm going to comment that out. So if we start to make a student's copy and we spread out, we create our object here, and then we spread out student ID to profiles map. So this thing up here, let's minimize this so we can see it all. All right, and we'll leave 1 for reference. So if we try to spread that out into a new object here, what looks like it works. So if we look at the logs up here of the first item is James, I'm taking 12 hours in my senior year. Jess worked a little bit harder than me. She took, or did I update her name to Sevi too? She was supposed to be, no. Anyway, I think it's displaying in a different order. But anyway, the information basically still looks the same. But there's one key difference here that you may not have caught before, is now because those nested things are objects themselves, if I go into the second item, or excuse me, not the second item, the one that's associated with the key one, which is actually the first item listed here, and I change the name of that object. So I'd go from James Quick to Billy. You would think that would only change inside of the original student ID to profiles map variable, but because these are objects, because these are passed by reference, these values that get copied over are references to the original values that were in this original map, which means now not only did it update the name Billy and the student ID to profiles map, it also did it inside of the student's copy. So the big takeaway here is that spread operator can be used to make copies of objects and arrays, but it won't be able to make copies of nested objects or multiple level deep objects. It only works the way you expect with primitives like numbers and strings and booleans, that sort of stuff. If you're copying over nested arrays, nested objects like this, it's not going to make a true copy. It's not going to make a deep clone. Now, if you're looking for a way to make a deep clone in JavaScript, make a deep clone of an object in JavaScript, there are some utilities that you can use. One hack that you'll probably see here, let's see, is to use the JSON parse slash stringify. So you parse or you stringify your object into a JSON literal string, and then you parse that thing back. That will actually create a full copy of it. And then there's a few limitations. If you do not use date, functions, undefined, infinity, regular expression maps, that's a few different things, then it will work. Otherwise, you can use a library like, well, these are not the ones that I was expecting. Lodash is one, and underscore are usually the ones that I hear about people using. And then here's a learning for me. I didn't know this. Native deep cloning works experimentally in Node 11 and later. I didn't know that. And hopefully will land in browser. So maybe we'll get there. I don't know. But just know if you're using the spread syntax, it may not do exactly what you think it will because it won't make a deep copy of nested objects. All right, hopefully that was helpful for you. I am actually working on a JavaScript challenges. I've got the domain javascriptchallenges.com, and I'm going to be working on a JavaScript challenges course where we will go through some of the challenge problems that you see on LeetCode and HackerRank and kind of learn JavaScript along the way in terms of how to solve problems. And you can bet that this stuff will come up. So keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in learning more, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I will be hopefully making announcements on that in the next couple of months. So you'll be able to see that here, or you can follow me on Twitter at JamesQQuick. Let me know if you'd be interested in this JavaScript challenges course and what kind of stuff you'd want to see in it. Let me know in the comments below. Thanks as always for checking out the video, and I'll catch you next time.